The decision to install a security system was mine, though Emma didn't resist. Our neighborhood had always been quiet, but a string of burglaries in recent months had everyone on edge. The thought of someone breaking into our home while we slept, or worse, while Emma was alone, was enough to convince me we needed cameras. "You're turning the house into Fort Knox," she joked as the technician drilled holes for the outdoor cameras. "What's next? Motion-activated laser beams?" "Just being cautious," I said, forcing a smile. "You'll thank me if it ever catches someone." Emma rolled her eyes, but didn't argue further. She rarely argued these days. The cameras were installed in the obvious places, one overlooking the driveway, another covering the front door, and a third watching the backyard. The system came with a mobile app, letting me monitor the footage from anywhere. For someone like me, always at work, always worried about what I couldn't control, it felt like peace of mind in my pocket. Emma wasn't thrilled about the indoor camera I placed in the living room, but I insisted. "It's for emergencies," I said. "If anyone breaks in, we'll have proof." She shrugged, not meeting my eyes. "Fine, Chris. Whatever makes you feel better." Emma and I had been married for 9 years, and though we were still young by most standards, something about us felt tired. I'd like to think we were happy once, but somewhere along the way, life had worn us down. My job as a project manager kept me at the office late most nights, while Emma's part-time work at a local bookstore left her with too much free time and too few people to share it with. We rarely fought, but that wasn't necessarily a good thing. It felt like there was nothing left to fight for. The cameras quickly became part of the routine. I checked the footage sporadically, mostly out of curiosity. The app sent notifications for motion detection, but it was always the same. A delivery driver dropping off a package, a squirrel darting across the driveway, or Emma taking out the trash. At first, it was a comfort knowing the house was secure. But as the days turned into weeks, I found myself checking the app more often, even when there was no alert. It wasn't about safety anymore. It was about watching. One Friday night, I got home later than usual, the house dark except for the soft glow of the TV in the living room. Emma was curled up on the couch, a blanket draped over her legs and a half-empty glass of wine on the coffee table. "Hey," I said, loosening my tie. "Long day?" She glanced up, her smile faint. "The usual. How about you?" "Same," I replied, sitting down beside her. The scent of her shampoo wafted toward me, familiar and comforting, but there was a distance in her eyes I couldn't ignore. I wanted to ask her if she was happy. I wanted to tell her how much I missed the way we used to be, but the words caught in my throat. Instead, I leaned back and stared at the TV, letting the moment slip away. The first time I noticed something strange was the following week. I'd stayed late at work again, and while I waited for a report to finish processing, I opened the security app out of habit. The timestamp read 7:14 p.m., just over an hour earlier, and showed Emma standing by the front door. She wasn't doing anything unusual, just lingering there, her hand resting on the doorknob as she glanced over her shoulder. I frowned, rewinding the footage to see what had prompted her behavior. She'd walked to the door after hearing something, her head tilted as if listening, but I couldn't see or hear what had caught her attention. Then, at 7:15, she opened the door slightly, peeking outside before stepping onto the porch. The video ended there. I tried to view the next segment, but the system hadn't recorded anything beyond that moment, likely because there hadn't been any significant motion detected. "Probably just checking for a package," I muttered to myself, though the explanation felt hollow. That night, as we lay in bed, I considered asking her about it. But when I glanced at her sleeping form, her face relaxed in the pale light of the moon, I pushed the thought aside. It was nothing. I was overthinking. Or so I told myself. The next few days passed uneventfully, but I couldn't shake the image of her standing by the door, her posture tense and her expression unreadable. I began checking the footage more frequently, not because I expected to find anything, but because I couldn't stop myself. It was a habit now, a quiet obsession. Then, on a Wednesday evening, I saw something that made my stomach drop. Emma had left the house at 6:45 p.m., her purse slung over her shoulder. The camera in the driveway caught her walking to her car, but instead of getting in, she stopped near the edge of the lawn, her gaze fixed on something out of view. A few seconds later, a man appeared on the screen. He was tall, wearing a dark jacket and jeans, his face partially obscured by the angle of the camera. They exchanged a few words, her hand gesturing toward the house, his head nodding slightly, before she reached out and touched his arm. The contact was brief, almost casual, but it sent a chill through me. My chest tightened as I watched her laugh at something he said, her smile brighter than it had been in months. After a minute, she glanced back toward the house, then quickly followed him out of frame. I sat there, staring at the screen, my mind racing with questions. Who was he? Where had they gone? And why hadn't she mentioned anything about meeting someone that evening? When Emma came home later that night, I didn't say a word. I sat at the kitchen table, pretending to read emails on my laptop, while she breezed through the door and hung up her coat. "Hey," she said, dropping her keys into the dish by the door. "Sorry I'm late. Kathy asked me to help her pick out some things for her garden. You know how she is, can't make a decision to save her life." I nodded, forcing a smile. "Sounds fun." She kissed me on the cheek before heading upstairs, leaving me alone with the weight of her lie. The next morning, Emma was humming in the kitchen, flipping pancakes like nothing had changed. The smell of butter and syrup filled the air, but I couldn't taste anything as I stared blankly at my plate. The image of her touching that man's arm, laughing with him, played on a loop in my mind. "You're quiet today," she said, glancing over her shoulder. "Everything okay?" I forced a smile, pushing the syrup around on my plate with a fork. "Yeah, just tired." Her brow furrowed, but she didn't press further. If she suspected anything, she didn't show it. Or maybe she was just a better actor than I realized. After she left for the bookstore, I opened the security app, scrolling back through the footage. I needed answers, something concrete to confirm or dismiss the gnawing feeling in my gut. The app logged motion events from every camera, and I sifted through them one by one, starting with the driveway. At 6:45 p.m., she'd stepped out of the house, purse in hand. The man had appeared a minute later, and together they'd walked out of frame. I switched to the backyard camera, hoping to catch another angle. Sure enough, it showed them crossing the lawn toward the side gate, disappearing into the alley behind the house. "What the hell?" I muttered, my pulse quickening. For the next 2 hours, I combed through every angle, every timestamp, trying to piece together a timeline. She hadn't driven anywhere, which meant they'd likely gone on foot. But to where? The cameras couldn't follow them beyond the property line, and the gaps in coverage left too many unanswered questions. Then I remembered something. The system had audio logs. They weren't always clear, but they occasionally picked up snippets of conversation near the cameras. I rewound to the driveway footage and turned on the audio. At first, there was only static and the faint hum of traffic in the distance. Then, her voice. "Can't stay long," she said, her tone low but familiar. "You sure?" the man replied, his voice deep and confident. "It's been a while." There was a pause, and then a soft laugh from her. Light, almost nervous. "I know. It's complicated, okay?" Complicated. The word hung in the air like a bad smell. My chest tightened as the conversation faded into garbled noise, leaving me with more questions than answers. Who was this man, and why was she meeting him in secret? That evening, I tried to act normal, though every glance at Emma made my stomach churn. She seemed oblivious, chatting about a book club meeting she was planning for the weekend. I nodded along, but my mind was elsewhere, replaying the footage and the fragments of their conversation. When she went to bed, I stayed up, claiming I had work to finish. Once the house was quiet, I opened the app again, determined to find more. If she had been meeting this man regularly, the cameras would have caught it. The pattern emerged faster than I expected. Every few nights, she'd step out around the same time, 6:30 or 7 p.m., and linger near the front door. The man would arrive shortly after, and they'd leave together. It wasn't every night, but it was frequent enough to confirm my worst fears. I expanded my search, checking footage from previous weeks. The same man appeared again and again, always meeting her in the same spot. Sometimes they'd talk for a few minutes before leaving. Other times, they'd disappear almost immediately. But one clip stood out. It was from 2 weeks ago, around 8 p.m. The driveway camera showed them returning, their heads close together as they whispered. Emma looked around nervously before leaning in and pressing a kiss to his cheek. It was quick, almost hesitant, but unmistakable. I froze, my stomach dropping like a lead weight. My hands shook as I replayed the clip, the kiss searing itself into my memory. It wasn't just a friendly meeting. It wasn't innocent. This was an affair. The realization hit me like a freight train, leaving me breathless and hollow. Emma, the woman I'd shared my life with, the woman I'd built a home with, was cheating on me. And she wasn't just lying. She was going out of her way to cover her tracks, to make me believe everything was fine. For a moment, I considered confronting her right then and there, marching upstairs and demanding answers. But a voice in the back of my mind stopped me. I needed more. If I confronted her now, she'd deny everything, twist the truth, and I'd be left with nothing but suspicions. No, I needed proof. Concrete, undeniable proof. The next day, I went to the hardware store and bought a small hidden camera. It wasn't part of the official security system, which meant Emma wouldn't know it was there. I installed it in the living room, carefully positioning it to capture both the front door and the couch where she often sat in the evenings. It felt wrong, intrusive, but I justified it to myself. She'd already betrayed my trust. What choice did I have but to protect myself? That evening, I pretended to go to a late meeting, telling Emma I wouldn't be home until after 10 p.m. She nodded, her expression unreadable, and kissed me on the cheek before I left. It took everything in me not to pull away. I parked a few blocks away, waiting in the car with the live feed from the hidden camera open on my phone. For nearly an hour, nothing happened. The living room remained empty, the house silent. I started to wonder if I'd been wrong, if tonight wouldn't be one of those nights. And then, at 7:15 p.m., the front door opened. Emma stepped inside, her coat draped over one arm, and behind her was the man. My pulse spiked as I watched them move to the couch, their conversation muted by the distance of the microphone. They sat close, too close, their knees nearly touching as they talked. I clenched my fists, my breath coming in shallow bursts. This was it. This was the proof I needed. But even as I stared at the screen, part of me hoped, prayed, that it wouldn't go further, that I wouldn't have to see what I already knew. But then, Emma reached out and touched his hand, and he leaned in. The image on my phone screen was surreal, like a scene from a nightmare I couldn't wake up from. Emma leaned closer to the man on the couch, their faces mere inches apart. My hand trembled as I watched her brush a strand of hair from his forehead, a gesture so familiar, so intimate, that it made my stomach turn. And then, they kissed. It wasn't a fleeting peck or an uncertain brush of lips. It was deep, lingering, filled with a passion I hadn't seen from her in years. My chest tightened, a hot wave of anger and heartbreak surging through me. I clenched my fists, the phone slipping slightly in my grip. For a moment, I debated storming into the house. The car was already running, and I could be there in minutes. I imagined throwing the door open, catching them in the act, and demanding an explanation. But I held back. I needed to think. I needed a plan. I recorded the footage, saving it to my phone and backing it up to the cloud. My mind raced with questions, each one more painful than the last. How long had this been going on? Who was this man? Did I even want the answers? The next morning, Emma acted as if nothing had happened. She greeted me with a soft smile and a cup of coffee, her movements unhurried and calm. It was maddening to see her so composed, so at ease, while I carried the weight of her betrayal like a stone in my chest. "How was your meeting last night?" she asked, her voice light. "Fine," I said curtly, not looking at her. She paused, her smile faltering. "You seem tense. Everything okay?" "Just tired," I lied, my jaw tight. "Work's been stressful." Her brow furrowed, and for a moment, I thought she might press further. But then she nodded, taking a sip of her coffee. "Well, let me know if there's anything I can do." The irony of her words was almost laughable. That evening, after she'd gone to bed, I sat in the living room with my laptop, reviewing the footage from the hidden camera. It was all there. The way she laughed at his jokes, the way he touched her knee, the way they kissed. My stomach churned with every frame, my mind replaying moments I'd already seen, as if trying to convince myself it was real. In one clip, they sat on the couch, talking quietly. The audio wasn't perfect, but I could make out fragments of their conversation. "I can't keep doing this," Emma said, her voice trembling. "Why not?" the man replied. "He doesn't even notice. He's so wrapped up in his work, he probably wouldn't care if you disappeared." She flinched at his words, shaking her head. "That's not fair. Chris is a good man." "Then why are you here?" he asked, leaning closer. "Why do you keep coming back to me?" Her silence was deafening. The weight of her betrayal settled over me like a suffocating blanket. It wasn't just the affair. It was the lies, the deceit, the version of herself she'd kept hidden from me. I thought about the life we'd built, the years we'd spent together, and wondered how much of it had been real. By the time the sun rose, I had made up my mind. I couldn't let this go on any longer. That evening, I told Emma I wanted to have dinner together, just the two of us. Her face lit up with surprise and what I thought might be guilt. "Really?" she asked. "That sounds nice. It's been a while since we've had a night to ourselves." "Yeah," I said, forcing a smile. "I figured we could use some time to reconnect." She nodded eagerly, oblivious to the storm brewing beneath my calm exterior. I chose a quiet restaurant on the edge of town, the kind of place where we wouldn't run into anyone we knew. Emma looked beautiful, her dress simple but elegant, her makeup understated. For a moment, I almost forgot why we were there. Almost. Over appetizers, we made small talk. She told me about her day at the bookstore, how a customer had insisted on finding the perfect gift for their daughter's birthday. I nodded along, my stomach churning with anticipation. It wasn't until the entrees arrived that I set my fork down and looked her in the eye. "Emma," I said, my voice steady, "is there something you want to tell me?" She blinked, caught off guard. "What do you mean?" "I mean," I said, leaning forward, "is there anything you've been keeping from me? Anything important?" Her smile faltered, and she glanced down at her plate. "Chris, what's this about?" I pulled my phone from my pocket and set it on the table, the screen glowing with the paused footage from the hidden camera. Her eyes widened as she recognized the image. Her and the man on the couch, their faces inches apart. For a long moment, she didn't speak. The color drained from her face, and her hands trembled as she reached for her water glass. "Chris," she whispered, her voice barely audible. "I can explain." "Explain?" I said, my voice rising. "What is there to explain, Emma? I've seen the footage. I've seen everything. You've been sneaking around, bringing him into our home, lying to my face. So go ahead, explain." Tears welled in her eyes as she struggled to find the words. I never meant for it to go this far," she said finally. "I was lonely, Chris. You've been so distant, so consumed with work, and I felt invisible." "Invisible?" I snapped. "So your solution was to cheat on me? To bring some stranger into our house and betray me?" "He's not a stranger," she said quietly. "His name is Tyler. We dated in college." Her confession hit me like a punch to the gut. "So this isn't just an affair," I said bitterly. "This is you rekindling some old flame behind my back." She sobbed, covering her face with her hands. "I'm sorry, Chris. I'm so sorry. I didn't know how to tell you. I didn't know how to stop." The room seemed to close in around me, the weight of her words suffocating. I stood abruptly, throwing a few bills on the table. "We're done here," I said coldly. "Chris, wait," she started, but I was already walking away, the sound of her sobs fading behind me. As I stepped into the cool night air, I realized something. The woman I thought I knew, the woman I had built my life with, was gone, and I didn't know if I could ever find her again. The drive home was a blur, the lights of the city streaking past like smears of color on a canvas. My mind was a storm of emotions, anger, betrayal, sadness, but beneath it all was an aching hollowness. The kind you feel when something fundamental has been ripped away, leaving only the jagged edges of what used to be. When I pulled into the driveway, I sat there for a long time, gripping the steering wheel as if it were the only thing tethering me to reality. The house loomed in front of me, its windows glowing softly, but it didn't feel like home anymore. It felt like a monument to everything I'd lost. Inside, the silence was deafening. Emma wasn't home yet, probably still at the restaurant, crying into her napkin and trying to make sense of what had just happened. I wasn't sure when, or if, she would come back. And honestly, I didn't care. I dropped onto the couch, staring blankly at the living room camera perched on the shelf. The very thing that had given me the truth, the evidence I'd needed, now felt like a silent witness to my unraveling. I opened the security app on my phone, scrolling through the footage one last time. The kiss, the whispered words, the touch of her hand on his arm. Each frame was a dagger to the heart, but I couldn't stop looking. I needed to remind myself of why this marriage, this life we'd built, was no longer salvageable. It was after midnight when the front door creaked open. Emma stepped inside, her eyes red and swollen, her shoulders slumped. She froze when she saw me sitting in the living room, her breath catching in her throat. "Chris," she whispered, as if saying my name would somehow undo everything. I didn't respond. I just stared at her, waiting for her to speak, to explain, to do something. She dropped her purse on the floor and moved closer, her hands trembling. "I'm sorry," she said, her voice breaking. "I know that doesn't even begin to cover it, but I am. I'm so sorry." "Sorry for what?" I asked, my voice flat. "For cheating on me? For lying to me? Or for getting caught?" Her face crumpled, and tears spilled down her cheeks. "For all of it. For everything. I made the worst mistake of my life, and I hate myself for it." I stood, the anger bubbling to the surface. "You hate yourself? That's what you're going with? What about me, Emma? What about what you've done to me? To us? Do you even understand the damage you've caused?" "I do," she said quickly, her voice desperate. "And I know I can't fix this overnight, but I want to try. I want to earn back your trust, Chris. Please, give me a chance." "A chance?" I laughed bitterly. "You think this is about giving you a chance? You've already had your chances, Emma. You had a chance every single time you met him, every time you lied to my face, and you chose to betray me. Over and over again." She reached for me, but I stepped back, the distance between us feeling like a chasm. "Chris, I love you," she said, her voice trembling. "I know I've hurt you, but I love you. That's why I ended things with Tyler. That's why I'm here." "Ended things?" I said, shaking my head. "You call bringing him into our house, kissing him on our couch, ending things? Don't insult me, Emma." The silence stretched between us, heavy and suffocating. Finally, she sank onto the couch, burying her face in her hands. "I don't know what to say," she whispered. "I don't know how to make this right." "Maybe you can't," I said, my voice cold. "Maybe some things can't be fixed." She looked up at me, her eyes filled with desperation. "So what does this mean? For us? For our family?" I sighed, the weight of the question pressing down on me. "It means I need time," I said. "I need space to figure out what I want, and whether this is something I can forgive." "And what about me?" she asked softly. "What am I supposed to do?" "Figure out why you did this," I said. "Figure out who you are and what you want, because right now, I don't think you even know." The next few days were a blur of avoidance and tension. Emma stayed in the guest room, and we barely spoke except for brief conversations about the kids. Caleb and Megan were thankfully oblivious, their lives continuing as if nothing had changed. But I knew it was only a matter of time before they noticed the cracks in the facade. Mark called to check in, his voice steady and supportive. "How are you holding up, man?" "Not great," I admitted. "It's like living with a stranger. I don't even know who she is anymore." "You don't have to figure it all out right now," he said. "Take it one day at a time." "I'm trying," I said, though it felt like an impossible task. A week later, Emma asked if we could talk. We sat in the kitchen, the distance between us feeling more like a canyon than a table. "I've been thinking about what you said," she began, her voice steady but subdued, "about figuring out who I am. And you're right. I've been so lost, and I let that drive me to make choices I'll regret for the rest of my life. But Chris, I don't want to lose you. I don't want to lose us." Her words were sincere, but they didn't erase the pain. They didn't erase the betrayal. "I don't know if I can do this," I said, my voice breaking. "I don't know if I can ever look at you the same way again." Tears streamed down her face, but she nodded. I understand, but I'm not giving up on you. On us. I'm going to keep fighting, even if you don't think it's worth it. That night, I lay awake in the dark, my mind racing. I thought about the life we'd built, the memories we'd shared, and the love that had once been so strong. But I also thought about the lies, the deceit, and the image of her with Tyler on our couch. Could we rebuild? Could I forgive her? Or was this the end of the road for us? I didn't have an answer. Not yet. But one thing was certain. Our lives would never be the same. The days that followed were a haze of tension and half-hearted attempts at normalcy. Emma and I tiptoed around each other, our conversations short and perfunctory, like strangers sharing the same roof out of necessity. The kids, blissfully unaware of the chaos brewing beneath the surface, carried on as though nothing had changed. Their laughter echoed through the house, a painful reminder of what we stood to lose. I threw myself into work, taking on extra projects and late nights to avoid being at home. The distance gave me clarity, but it also magnified the ache of what we'd become. Every hour away from Emma felt like another nail in the coffin of our marriage, but I wasn't sure if I was ready to let go, or if I even could. One evening, Mark invited me out for drinks, sensing I needed an escape. We sat in the corner of a dimly lit bar, nursing beers as I poured out everything that had been weighing on me. I don't know if I can forgive her, I admitted, my voice heavy. Every time I look at her, I see him. I see the lies. I see everything we've lost. Mark nodded, his expression thoughtful. Forgiveness isn't easy, he said. It's not something you do for them. It's something you do for yourself. But that doesn't mean you have to stay. That's the thing, I said, shaking my head. I don't know what's worse, staying and never trusting her again, or leaving and tearing our family apart. Mark leaned back, studying me. You've got to ask yourself one question, man. Can you rebuild? Not just for the kids, but for yourself. Can you ever truly feel whole with her again? That question stayed with me as I drove home, the words looping in my mind. I thought about our marriage, the good times and the bad, and the love that had once felt unbreakable. But I also thought about the betrayal, the lies, and the undeniable fact that the woman I trusted most in the world had shattered that trust. When I walked into the house, Emma was sitting on the couch, her hands clasped tightly in her lap. She looked up as I entered, her eyes filled with a mix of hope and fear. "Can we talk?" she asked softly. I nodded, setting my keys down on the table. "Yeah, let's talk." We sat across from each other at the dining room table, the silence stretching between us. Emma was the first to speak, her voice trembling but determined. "I've been thinking a lot about what you said," she began, "about figuring out who I am and what I want. And I realized I've been so afraid of losing myself that I ended up losing you instead." Her words were sincere, but they didn't erase the pain. I folded my arms, leaning back in my chair. "And what now? What do you want, Emma?" "I want to fix this," she said, tears welling in her eyes. "I want to prove to you that I'm still the woman you fell in love with, that I'm worth fighting for." Her plea hung in the air, heavy and raw. For a moment, I wanted to believe her. I wanted to believe that we could rebuild, that the love we'd shared could survive this storm. But deep down, I wasn't sure if I had the strength to try. "I don't know if I can do this," I said finally, my voice cracking. "I don't know if I can ever look at you the same way again. Every time I see you, I think about him, about the lies, about how easily you threw everything away." She sobbed, covering her face with her hands. "I know I've hurt you," she said, her voice muffled, "and I know I can't undo what I've done. But I love you, Chris. I love you, and I'll spend the rest of my life proving it if you let me." Her words cut deep, but they didn't heal the wound. They couldn't. "I need to be honest with you," I said, my voice steady but cold. "I don't think I can ever forgive you. I don't think I'll ever be able to trust you again. And without trust, what's the point of trying to rebuild?" The silence that followed was deafening. Emma looked at me, her face pale and streaked with tears, and nodded slowly. "If that's how you feel," she said quietly, "then I won't fight you. I don't want to make this harder for you, or for the kids." Her resignation felt like a punch to the gut. I'd expected her to argue, to plead, to fight. But instead, she simply accepted my decision, as if she'd known all along that this was where we'd end up. We agreed to separate, and the weeks that followed were some of the hardest of my life. Telling the kids was gut-wrenching, their confusion and sadness cutting through me like a blade. We tried to explain it as best we could, assuring them that we both loved them and that this wasn't their fault. But their tears told me everything I needed to know about the collateral damage of our choices. Emma moved out of the house, finding a small apartment nearby, so the kids could still see her regularly. The house felt emptier without her, but it also felt lighter, like a weight had been lifted, even if the scars of our marriage remained. Months later, I sat in my therapist's office, reflecting on everything that had happened. The pain of Emma's betrayal still lingered, but it no longer consumed me. I'd begun to rebuild my life piece by piece, focusing on my relationship with the kids and finding solace in the support of friends like Mark. "Do you think you'll ever forgive her?" my therapist asked, her voice gentle. I thought about it for a long moment before answering. "I don't know," I said honestly, "but I'm working on forgiving myself. For not seeing the signs, for not being the husband she needed, for letting things get to this point. That's all I can do right now." Life wasn't perfect, but it was moving forward. And as I stood on the porch one crisp autumn evening, watching the sun set over the quiet street, I realized something. The end of my marriage wasn't the end of my story. It was the beginning of a new chapter, one where I could rebuild, rediscover, and, someday, maybe even find happiness again.